Hello and a warm welcome to all of you on this largest continuing education portal for dental education in the world, Dental XP. It's an honor and privilege for me to be here. My topic for today's discussion is an overview of the full mouth rehabilitation system or a process that we follow in our practice. And we are going to look at a couple of cases and see how to take them step by step. If I would to lay down the learning objectives for this program, I would say that the first thing I will do is look at the diagnosis and the risk assessment in detail. I will look at the understanding and the sequencing for the management strategies for these complex full mouth rehabilitation cases. We will look at various clinical cases and scenarios to see how to set them up for a very good finish. And I want to give you some guidelines for establishing good occlusal practices in your day-to-day work. In the natural dentition especially, this is not related to implant dentistry at all. I practice in a small suburb of Bombay called Khar, and Bombay being the financial capital of India, we see a lot of patients who have truncated timelines, and sometimes we need to cater to that need, and we do provide treatment for these patients over a period of time, and I will bring a snippet of this treatment to you in the next 45 minutes or so. I also spend a lot of time in my training academy called Impart Education with my fellow colleagues, and I spend time teaching the subject of full mouth rehabilitation as well as various basic and implant dentistry concepts. Well, if I have to define full mouth rehabilitation as such, over the 22 years that I've been working, I have made my own definition of this subject. It's a process of organized and conservative functional and aesthetic rejuvenation of the dentition that is afflicted with a myriad of diseases. And this disease affects the entire dentition. It could be perio disease, it could be erosion, it could be severe attrition and a totally worn down dentition, or it could be a patient with an intact dentition but with severe TMJ problems. All these get encompassed within the parameters of the subject of full mouth rehabilitation. This lecture by no way is a comprehensive guide to this vast subject. It's just an overall view as to what systems we follow in our. Now, when you look at clinical cases, there are two types of these cases that we will see. There are ones with anterior wear only, and sometimes you'll see cases with generalized wear. The protocols for them differ. So when you're looking at anterior wear, you'll first want to deprogram the patient and relax the muscles to find the harmony between MIP and CR. You will want to eliminate all the interferences which may be anterior or posterior. Do a wax up to view the final result on the model, and then convert that wax up into a three-dimensional mock-up in the patient's mouth so that they can test drive at, and then make definitive restorations in the end based on what materials you want to choose. When you look at generalized wear, you first want to deprogram the patient maybe with a Lucia jig or a Cois deprogrammer. Take an aesthetic face bow and mount the upper cast, and then a centric record to mount the lower cast. Once you have mounted this on the articulator, you decide the vertical dimension of occlusion that you want to work with for that patient. Of course, that's a big topic and we'll discuss some part of it. You do a wax up and then go ahead and make a provisional, and then make the final restorations based on your test driven and approved provisionals. For all practical purposes in this particular lecture, I'm going to focus only on patients which require treatment for all 28 teeth. So these could be generalized wear or patients which require a full mouth rehabilitation in which the vertical dimension has to be altered, and the protocols that we'll need to follow that. We will not discuss on aesthetic treatment rendition for anterior wear at all in this presentation. Now, when you look at a complex case like this, remember that it's not an easy case. You can't just go ahead and deprogram a patient like this with so much faulty pathology in the mouth. So there has to be a phase-wise treatment protocol that you need to follow. And what I follow in my practice is to divide the treatment into 4 distinct phases. Phase 1 is removal of all faulty restorations and assessing all teeth and making some provisionals for the patient to continue socializing in the interim period while I figure out what treatment I want to do. The phase 2 is extraction, any perio treatment, implant placements, any grafting needs that have to be done. And then comes phase 3, in which you will actually start with the restorative phase, where you will do the wax ups at the desired vertical dimension, make provisionals on teeth or temporaries on implants, deprogram and equilibrate at that point. So deprogramming and equilibration does not have to be in phase 1 when you need surgical treatment to be done. You will then go ahead with impressions and do your trials, deliveries, and then maintain the occlusion that you have given to the patient over a period of time. So every patient has to be taken through a very systematic approach and not a haphazard sequence which can lead to unpredictable responses. So our goal is to give you a pathway from the beginning, the first time when you see the patient, till the day you deliver the final restoration and adjust the occlusion. What does it entail to do a full mouth rehabilitation successfully? That's Now all of us have heard these terms before of types of mutually protected occlusion, group function, balanced occlusion. Balanced occlusion is for complete dentures. We don't talk much about that. But there are some of these myths of mutually protected and group function occlusion, which I want to discuss a bit before we go further. So this basic tenet of mutually protected occlusion is that when the patient's mandible goes on the right and left lateral excursions, at that point canine should take the brunt of that movement and save all other teeth from any excessive force. And that's a great thought to have for the canine because it's a long stout root, has good proprioception. But the problem here is that we have assumed that because the canines are touching, the elevator activity of the muscles will reduce and the force on the system will be less. Now it should be noted that when the canine has to touch, that means the patient's mandible has to come downwards when the canine has to come edge to edge. And that's why the elevators have to anyway shut activity. It is not because the canines are touching that the elevators will shut activity. So mutually protected occlusion works very well, but it's a postured position. It's not something which the patient uses to eat with. And I'll elaborate a little bit more. So when I used to do treatment around 15 years back for our patients, we used to follow this procedure of posturing the patients in these views that you see here on the slide up. And these views are basically the protrusive and posterior disclusion and right and left lateral excursion and disclusion of all other teeth. But we don't go into these postured positions anymore with our patients, and we want to elaborate that with a few slides that will follow. The second concept is the concept of group function occlusion, in which during lateral excursions, the brunt of lateral excursion is taken care of by the canines and the first premolar, sometimes the second premolar, and sometimes the lateral incisor. In that case, we end up calling it the anterior group function. So the goal here is to allow the patient to close into MIP, and then when the patient slides in right and left lateral excursion, these group of teeth should come in contact and save all the other teeth from excessive wear. Of course, the group function is recommended when the canine itself is either missing or is permanently compromised and not good enough to take the brunt of occlusion by itself in the lateral direction. But the problem here is that human beings do not chew like this. You don't go into MIP first and don't go into right and left lateral excursion to chew food. For you to be able, you will have to be a little flexible in your thought process, and that's why I want you to be a little open-minded in your occlusion rendition for the patient, because one occlusion does not fit all. And any philosophy that tells you that only this occlusion has to be given to this particular brand of humanity that we are working with, it doesn't work. We have to have a greater leeway in the system, because human beings are the most adaptable race on the planet Earth. So here is the basic what we follow. The system does not work from right working and left working and protrusive, because that's not how you eat. You have to put the food in the mouth first, for which you will first open your mouth, put the bolus of food inside, and then start chewing. You actually take your mandible first outside and then come inside, and you end in MIP. MIP is the end point of occlusion and not the starting point of occlusion. And that's what we want to focus on when we are deciding the occlusal schemes as well as the occlusal adjustments for all our patients. Now you saw the basic tenets of mutually protected and group function, but look at this particular patient. She is 44 years old, has really good anatomy of the teeth. For 44 years old, the only signs which could be told as occlusal breakdown here, if it's a breakdown, is the presence of a little abfraction cavities which are there on the lower premolars. They are a little more prominent. But overall, I would say that these are really good teeth at 44 years of age with no disease at all, no caries, no perio issues, and there is no erosion in the cavity, in the oral cavity here. When this patient protrudes, there is no anterior guidance. Only posterior teeth are touching. Her anterior teeth don't come into contact at all. So that in spite of not having the mutually protected occlusion that we talk about, this patient is not breaking down. This system is working for her. And when you go in right lateral excursion, again the guidance is on posterior teeth, it's not on the canines at all. You go in left lateral excursion, the guidance is on premolars, it's not on canines or at all, and the non-working side teeth also are touching over here. And this clearly shows that in spite of this type of mal-occlusion, if I could classify it as that, there is no breakdown of the system. The patient can breathe, the patient can sleep, the patient can talk, and she can eat very well without any problem. So unless an external disease like caries or erosion will come and disrupt this dentition, she is not going to break down her dentition because of occlusion. It's worked for 44 years. It's going to work for many more years if no dentistry is done or if faulty dentistry is not done. This particular case and many like this set me thinking that are we on the right path to follow the concept of mutually protected and group function and apply that to each and every patient that we see in our practice. And the quest for that took me to one of the greatest minds in the field of occlusion today, and that is Dr. John Kois. And I've been his student over the last many years, more than 10 years now. And over the years, as I've seen and followed his system, I've realized that that is something that makes really good sense, because I'm not confined to a cookbook recipe at all, and it allows me to follow a system that gives me predictability as well as durability in the work that I do. And a lot of my thought process over here, as well as my thinking, I owe it to Dr. Kois for explaining it so well in all his lectures and his articles, and allowing us to hone our skills in this subject and have a better understanding of the human masticatory system. So our process basically requires us to take a medical and a dental history. We do a data collection. We do a thorough diagnosis, and then based on that diagnosis, we chalk out a risk assessment and see where the risk assessment lies at the patient's charting. And we then look at the treatment concepts, which I'll elaborate as we discuss the cases. So when you look at this particular picture, and the basic philosophy of the entire teaching here is to see to it that you can look at this dentition and organize what you look at. So we break down the dentition into 4 distinct categories. We do a thorough periodontal evaluation, a biomechanical evaluation, a functional evaluation, and a dentofacial evaluation. And every patient's smile as well as the retracted view is used to do these evaluation along with the radiographs and the imaging techniques that you would like to use, so that you can arrive at a thorough diagnosis in these 4 categories, arrive at a thorough risk assessment in these 4 categories, and then make your treatment plan to conquer the aspect of disease in whichever category you are suffering with. So if I would go back here and I look at this picture, what is this patient's periodontal status? Is that it's not that bad. When I know the X-ray findings, I know that she is not losing a lot of bone. She has got good soft tissue. But when I look at the functional aspects, I know that she is losing a few teeth. There are some issues with her bite because of absence of teeth. The biggest concern here is the biomechanically high risk, especially on the upper left central incisor, upper left canine, and some of the premolars on the right hand side. These are biomechanically at a high risk for fracture. So I would, in a nutshell, call this person periodontally a moderate risk, functionally a moderate risk, biomechanically a high risk for some teeth, and dentofacially I can't make a risk assessment from this picture. We'll need the smile picture for that. And all patients with gummy smile will show your entire dentistry to the rest of the world. They are the ones who will be having the high risk of treatment. Now look at this patient. When he smiles, there is a lot of issues with his dentition that you can see. There is a severe amount of loss of tooth structure from the labial side, incisal aspect. He has a gummy smile. He shows the entire dentistry that is going to be done for him. And dentofacially, this person is a high risk. Biomechanically, I think he is a high risk already with the picture that I have in front of me. Functionally, I'll have to look at the bite, and we'll look at the aspect in just a moment. And periodontally, we'll look at the. So when you're looking at this particular retracted view of the same patient, you know that the bite is not really well. But is this patient's dentition breaking down because of occlusal disease, or is it because of other aspects? When I look at the occlusal aspect of this patient's dentition, I realize that this is not wear because of occlusion, because I can't line up the casts of this patient well and simulate that wear pattern. This is not attrition. This is maybe started with attrition or parafunction earlier, but now there is an asset component to the entire disease process here. This patient is having all his teeth as severe biomechanically high risk of treatment failure if the treatment is done for him. Our goal in such a patient is to chalk out a systematic approach to try and resurrect the entire dentition, each and every tooth, so that we are able to make a proper occlusal surfaces for these teeth, which will allow these teeth to be protected from future abuse from acid. Of course, there has to be a lot of lifestyle changes. We need to look at the medical questionnaire and see if the patient has any gastric issues, if the patient has any habits of having fizzy drinks, and then look at the entire subject in that light. My goal here is to just try and stimulate you to think beyond occlusion for some of these cases. And when you say that occlusion is not a big problem for this particular patient, that means I need to follow simple occlusal philosophies to treat them. I don't need to take very complex records and complicate the entire treatment plan for him from an occlusion standpoint. It's a simple treatment. One aspect that Dr. Kois always talks about, and which something just went into my brain right from the time that I've been reading his articles many years ago, is that the goal of the brain is to find the teeth in MIP. The brain has already established a chewing pathway, and our goal as dentists is to not make teeth that come in the way of that. A simple example is when you're doing a smile design for a patient and you're making upper 6 veneers. Sometimes you do a wrap around on those veneers on the palatal side, and you realize that the wrap around portion of the veneer has become a little bulkier. And because of that bulk not coming in the way of MIP, the patient goes back home. But the moment he starts to chew with it, that bulk starts to hit the lower anterior teeth, and that starts to constrict the chewing envelope of the patient. In that particular case, you have now put something in the chewing pathway of the patient, and that something will now either break or cause some issues with the periodontium, or cause migration of the tooth, or cause overall muscular pain and TMJ problem. Anything can happen depending on the host response. So we need to understand the goal or role of that the brain plays in finding these in finding the MIP. Now, the key to understanding occlusion is to understand how the brain finds the teeth. It does not need guidances. It does not need the canine to couple first and then take the entire jaw into MIP. The brain knows how to find MIP even without the canine being present. The only goal here is to make the restoration such that do not, in the name of guidance, don't over counter them, don't come in the way of the chewing pathway. The occlusion has to be effortless. The patient should be able to find MIP without any teeth coming in the way. And if the teeth do come in the way, then they will lead to attrition, mobility, TM disease, anything of that sort, which can happen because of the chewing pathway interferences. When you look at this X-ray, this is a patient whose full mouth rehab has been done around 18 years ago. But at that time, the concept of full mouth rehab was different, where we used to do endodontic treatment for most of the teeth, do post and course, do a crown lengthening, get more crown height, and then make cohesively retained crown on all the teeth. And that's how we were putting each and every tooth at a very high biomechanical risk of fracture. But today we have adhesive dentistry, and our understanding of tooth morphology is much better. With the work done by people in the field of aesthetic dentistry like Dr. Pascal Manier and his colleagues, it has made a big difference in understanding what happens to the tooth once you cut the tooth down too much. So our goal is not to cut the tooth too much and do adhesive protocols wherever possible so that we can take maximum advantage of saving the tooth structure and managing these complex cases. So our goal is from a condition like this where they have a developmental disorder like amelogenesis imperfecta, and at the end of this treatment plan in which he gets the entire restoration of the aesthetics and occlusion done, okay, and when when this treatment is done at the end, there is no root canals done for any of the teeth intentionally. So we are preserving the vitality of all the teeth, trying not to prepare the teeth too much. We go towards techniques which allow us to do that, and that's the entire sequence which you have to learn. So it's your diagnosis and risk assessment at one point, and it's your treatment planning and being conservative at the other end by choice of proper restorative materials. That's what we will be looking at. So with this little background, let us see two cases, and these two cases are going to give us an insight into all the aspects of full mouth rehab and what we are thinking. We'll see a full protocol of these two patients, but first we'll start with this little timeline that I've made, and this is where a patient who comes to you for a full mouth rehab with a bone dentition has no TMJ pathology, muscles are fine, and he has a little time to spend on his entire treatment. My first visit with the patient would be all the diagnostic data. I would collect impressions, I would see that I take all the pictures and photographs that are required to treatment plan. I'll wait for around 48 hours from that point in which I will make a deprogrammer for the patient, preferably something which he can wear overnight, something like a Cois deprogrammer. I'll ask the patient to wear this for at least 1 or 2 weeks and then come back to me for all the records, in which I will take a face bow record and a centric record to mount the upper and the lower casts and get the patient's entire case on the articulator. From here onwards, I will design the vertical dimension of occlusion and ask my lab to do a wax up for me at the desired vertical dimension. From there, we will call the patient on the 4th visit and make a provisional restoration for the patient on all the teeth that have to be restored. Then these provisional restorations will be sequentially removed to perform any surgical work or root canal therapy that has to be done for the patient. That might take 1 or 2 sittings from there on. And then based on whether I've done implants or endodontics, we will have a healing period of anything between 2 weeks to 4 months, depending on whether grafting was required or not. At the end of that healing period and provisionalization, we will then go ahead and make the anterior final restorations and then the posterior final restorations. So given a choice, I would stage the final restorations into 2 parts rather than doing all the 28 restorations together. But of course, if time is of essence and we want to minimize the number of sittings, then step number 7 and 8 can be done at one go and minimize the number of sittings there. So when we are treating this patient now and we will look at the entire protocol, we will do a staged approach. So we will spread out the treatment nicely so that we can work on the entire concept in that manner. Our overall treatment time would be around 3 to 4 months. When you have done enough cases over a period of 10 to 15 years over this timeline, then comes a time when you can start to shorten the timeline. If you are having acceptable function and there is no issues with the TMJ pathology at all and the load test is negative, then in that case you can do this entire treatment plan within 15 days if required. So within 2 or 3 visits over a period of 2 weeks, this entire timeline can be constricted so that the treatment can be done. But the idea is that the patient should have acceptable function, not some dysfunctional occlusion, should not have some constricted chewing pattern which requires some orthodontic treatment, and should not have parafunction. So let's start with the patient. This is a guy around 55 years old and he has got a wound dentition. This is his maximum smile in the initial part of the treatment. As we progressed with the treatment, the smile became a little better, but at this point he was unable to elicit any further lip movement or mobility with his smile. These are the pictures that I would take for each and every patient, and that's the information I would gather from every patient for whom a full mouth rehab is. The next picture would be of a patient in lip repose. So when the patient says words containing M, like Emma, in that case, when he finishes saying that word, the teeth are a little separated from each other and the lip is at rest position. At that point, I want to see whether the patient displays any of the upper cuspids and the incisors or not. If he does not display the upper cuspids, then based on the cuspid zero concept, I would like to increase the length of the upper cuspid so that they come in line with the upper lip when the lip is in repose. So that's my diagnostic criteria here, and I'm looking at this patient and seeing that he does not show not only his cuspids but even his upper centrals. He doesn't show any upper teeth at all. So by the end of the treatment, I need to get some visibility on the upper teeth so as to make the treatment aesthetically better. That's his retracted view. When I've taken the lip and the cheek aside, I can see his bite now, and I get a sense of the dentition here where there is a lot of loss of tooth structure on the lateral incisor, especially the upper right, and most of these upper anterior teeth have lost some form of uh, enamel from the incisal edges. The labial surfaces otherwise look very nice and intact. That means there is no acid influx from the labial side, which is a good thing. And we'll look at the palatal view in some time. But the sense I'm getting here is that this patient is losing teeth beyond physiologic attrition. And basically, physiologic attrition is wearing away teeth up to 11 microns per year. But it should take around 100 years for the patient to wear down 1 millimeter of enamel. But in this case, he has almost lost around 1.5 millimeter of the enamel from the upper central incisors. So in this particular patient, I am going to restore the length of the central incisors. I only have to see if I can go coronally with my length increase, or do I need to go to the gingival aspect, and that further pictures will let us know. In fact, we already know from the patient's smile that he doesn't have a gummy smile at all. He hardly has any tooth display. So I don't need to correct the gingival levels in this case, and that's why the upper left canine, although it's at a higher level here, the gingiva, I'm going to leave it like that only and not do any surgical treatment for him because it's an asymptomatic tooth. As long as I can make a good restoration there and maintain the gingival levels, that's what my goal is going to be. If the same patient had a gummy smile, then I would look at either a connective tissue graft or a free gingival graft in that area to correct the canine, some soft tissue procedures for that. But in this case, I won't be doing any such treatment for the upper left canine. When the patient's teeth are separated, it gives you a sense of the amount of attrition that has now happened on the lower teeth. Each and every tooth has lost the enamel almost 2 millimeters in the lower jaw. And you can see right up till the molar, the dentine is exposed, except on the patient's left hand side, there is a crown here, which is metallic, not very aesthetically looking, and that is something that is not treated a lot. And of course, that's because the material is far stronger than any enamel material that we can see. For example, this bridge that was there, but I will be low risk in certain other areas. Most of the teeth are biomechanically low risk. Functionally, he is at a moderate risk. We classified his occlusal disorder as occlusal dysfunction because he had an issue with the wear down pattern of his teeth, and this is not his normal function. He is not having acceptable function because he did report a little bit of snoring while sleeping, and we are going to test that and see if that will have any bearing on our treatment. This is the upper arch, and when I look at the upper arch, the upper premolar to premolar, most teeth are treated, and otherwise there are faulty bridges. So I have no doubt that I need to restore upper arch as well as the lower arch. When I look at the patient's lower left 7, I realize that that tooth is very, very structurally compromised. So biomechanically, it's at a very high risk along with the lower left 5. So when I look at these teeth, I realize that these teeth are the ones that are going to be at a high risk biomechanically. And I'm going to take x-rays and see if I want to save these teeth. If I cannot, then I'm going to extract that tooth and consider doing an implant. At this point, in my first steps that I have to take for this patient, I don't need to extract that tooth. I can wait on that and defer that for a few more sittings before I take my final call. That's the overall X-ray, panoramic X-ray of the patient, and none of the teeth have been endodontically treated so far except tooth number 37, and that's the lower left 7 for you guys, and that might be a compromise for us. There are some endodontic treatment done for the upper right premolars, and we might need to repeat some of those. But look at the sinus positioning. There is no residual bone below the sinus over here, no native bone I have to put an implant. That means I would have to lift the membrane here, put a sinus grafting material there, a lateral window, and then come back with an implant placement, and that would take me around 6 to 8 months to complete the treatment. In this particular patient, that option is not there, and even if he had the option, because the adjacent teeth are already cut for a bridge, at this point the simpler thing to do is to make a bridge for him, and then if that bridge gives way in the next 8-10 years, we can always consider doing a sinus graft for a couple of teeth per year, which will be easier to do than doing it for one single tooth. So with that approach, I'm going to treat this patient without any implant work. One of the key imaging techniques that we follow is the recording of the lateral cephalogram of the patient, and these are the 8 readings, and Dr. Kois has been beautiful when he explains these aspects, and these are the 8 readings that we need for all our diagnosis from the initial imaging. And the key points here are the SNMP angle, which tells you the vertical dimension. It should be around 32, and in this case it has become 15. That means I'm almost sure that I can increase the vertical dimension, and when I'll be doing that, I don't need to worry about how much to increase the vertical dimension. As long as I'm in the right direction, the number of millimeters on the articulator that will be opened will depend on how much restorative space I need. And I would need around 1.5 to 2 millimeters here per arch. So I will raise the vertical dimension by about 3 mm. But if I'm increasing the vertical dimension by 3 or 4 mm or millimeters, in that case, if the SNMP angle is already too much, then I'm going in the wrong direction. The patient already has a long face. In that case, I need to look at other options for treatment and not increase the vertical dimension. I also would look at the ratio of the upper anterior face height to the lower anterior face height, which should be around 0.8. In this case, it's around 0.6. That means the patient's upper anterior face height is more than the lower anterior face height. And by increasing the vertical dimension here, I'm going to go in the right direction again to get the facial proportions right. So with that little background on the cephalometrics, which is a key point in each and every full mouth rehab patient to decide whether vertical dimension can be increased or not, we'll go ahead and see how we'll apply this information next aspect. I have followed the forms that Dr. Kois has designed for many years now. It's almost been a decade, but in the last 5 to 7 years, I have been following them diligently, and I realized that after following them for many years now, I don't need the forms anymore. The forms were like a training wheel, a way for me to think about how to approach the case. Now I'm set with that protocol, and this is what we do for all our patients. So this case that we are seeing over here is a recent one, and our diagnosis is occlusal dysfunction. We first take a pre-op scan for this patient. So we have taken an intraoral scan of the pre-operative condition, and we are going to use these data to transfer to the lab to make a 3D printed model. On this 3D printed model, I have an option of doing a digital wax up and then printing out the model for me to make a putty index. But I chose to print the model as it is and then do an analog wax up, because the feel of the wax and the texture is something which I like more in the analog world right now as compared to what it can be done with the digital tools. Out of the 10 key steps that we're looking at, the first step was just completed, and now we are looking at the second step, that's to mount the upper cast in an aesthetically accurate position. And for this, I feel there is no simpler way to do this than the dentofacial analyzer. And this particular analyzer is made for the Panadent articulator to mount the upper incisor contact point exactly 100 millimeters from the intercondylar axis. That's the basic premise of the origin of the Bonville triangle of occlusion theory, and that's what he has taken here as a guideline to mount the upper cast central incisor contact point exactly 100 millimeters from the intercondylar axis. Of course, you don't have to use the Panadent. You can use any articulator you like and make your jig mounting in such a way that you are exactly 100 millimeters at the contact point of the central incisor from the intercondylar axis. Once you get that distance for your articulator, you can adapt the coils dentofacial analyzer to any articulator you like, as long as you have upper member that can be separated out. So we look at some studies here and we realize that Coyce himself has, before he designed this articulator, done the study where in 2013 he published this article where more than 89% of the individuals that were studied had the contact point of the central incisor 100 millimeters from the intercondylar axis of the hinge axis, and that based on that he designed his Phasebow or the dentofacial analyzer, and that has been a turning point in how we manage the orientation of the upper cast. For many years, we used to use the earpiece Phasebow and the fascia Phasebow. Nothing wrong with that. The only problem is that in a large percentage of humanity, the ears and the eyes are not lined up well on the face. One ear is a little higher as compared to the other external meatus, and in that case, your upper cast can get mounted aesthetically incorrect. If you want the upper cast to be aesthetically mounted correctly, the way you look at the patient and the way lab would look at, there is no substitute right now to the Coyce dentofacial analyzer. Our third step is to deprogram the patient now and take a centric relation record. And this deprogramming can be done with various methods. Every school of occlusion has their own methods, but I've narrowed down to these two, apart from which I don't really venture into other ideas. My number one choice is a Coyce deprogrammer, where if the patient has anything but acceptable dysfunction, I would choose a Coyce deprogrammer as my deprogrammer of choice. But if the patient does has acceptable function, I would use Lushajig as a chairside deprogramming method. So we'll look at some of these aspects. A Coyce deprogrammer is basically a plate like this, which has an anterior ramp into which the lower tooth will come and make a single point contact, so that you will have only the lower anteriors touching this ramp and no other teeth will be contacting at all. So all the influence of dentition on the muscles is removed and the muscles are allowed to relax and take the condyles in their home position. That's the position of comfort. It could be the centric relation by definition, which is the anterior superior position in the glenoid fossa, or it could be any other adapted position in the TMJ, as long as it's reproducible and is a position of comfort. Whatever I find with the Coyce deprogrammer as my position of contact here is my starting point for rehabilitating the patient, and that's my CR. That's how the patient would look when he would wear the Coyce deprogrammer. There are many variations to this design. Sometimes I just put this labial bow with a little bit of extension from the bow into the plate, just to allow the bow to remain a little rigid and not be too flexible and hurt the gums. In this particular patient that we are talking, I did a chairside deprogramming first to begin with, and I could easily find a point of contact at which I could take the record. So I took the record in this particular fashion so that I could have the 3D printed models mounted on the articulator and then go ahead and get the lower cast mounted with the central record. Here I also took a scan like this. So when the Lucia jig was in place with the deprogramming done, a digital scan of the bite was taken at this vertical dimension at which I want to restore him. So the lab has an idea of what my vertical dimension increase should be. At the same time, he has a wax record to mount the 3D printed models to get the wax up done. There are various ways to get there, and as long as you get the right vertical and a good wax up, these are all fine. Okay. The next key step is to get the upper and the lower wax up done. In this case, I have to do full contour crowns. I can't do veneers in the front and onlays at the back, because the patient has a change in vertical dimension that is required. The lower anteriors have to be built up as far as the incisal edges are concerned, and if I don't put a coverage on the upper palatal surfaces, I'll have nothing to contact the lower anteriors. So as to achieve that contact with the lower anteriors, I decided to cover the palatal aspect of the upper anteriors, and that's why a full crown is required. But mind you, my goal here is to see that I don't end up doing too many interventional root canals to cut the teeth too much for cohesively retained restorations. I'm going to do everything adhesive, and at the end of my tooth preparations, I want to be in enamel everywhere where enamel is left. So I'll not be going into dentine on the labial surface or the parietal surfaces of any of these teeth unless somebody has already cut those teeth before. At this point, the dentofacial analyzer has a wax up guide which can be used to get the upper plane perfect, so that when the upper plane is parallel to the floor, it's going to be lined up well with the patient's mouth, with the patient's face, with no canting at all on the midline. And that's another advantage of using the Cois dentofacial analyzer. The next step is to make bonded provisionals. From that wax up to this provisional now, these provisionals are bonded in this patient, the same patient that we are talking about, and he's very comfortable with it. How did he get to this stage? So from the wax up, I'll make a putty and a light body index like this. And this is my chosen technique, which I've been using for almost the last 10 to 12 years without any change. I don't like to change things that work for me. Uh, I come back to the patient's situation, and here I'm going to etch all the teeth with phosphoric acid for around 10 seconds, a total etch. I'm not prepared any tooth at all. I've not touched any drill on these teeth, and I've etched them. You see, in certain areas I have got good amount of enamel present, and so there's frosting of that enamel. I'll apply a bonding agent on this, light cure the bonding agent. My goal here is to put bis-acryl composite on the putty index and carry that putty index in the mouth and come to a stage like this where all the upper provisionals are now completely bonded 360 degrees to all these teeth, and they're not going to easily come off unless I take them off with a burr. So these are not removable provisionals, these are fixed. The patient can go back home with these. He can test drive the aesthetics as well as function and see whether he likes this aspect. When I look at the smile, a cursory glance at it, it looks much nicer now as compared to before, and I'm happy with the way the upper teeth have lined up, and so have the overall lower teeth and the look. It's just that the color is too monochromatic and plasticky right now, and that's because it's a plastic material. We'll work on that look a little later. Your goal at this stage is to decide the position of the upper teeth on the face and be happy with the vertical dimension that you have created. The patients need time to adapt to this change. So we wait for around 2 to 3 weeks with these provisionals, and once the patient comes back with no negative findings, with load test being negative, and there is no problem with the muscles or the joint, we will go ahead with our final restoration. So that's how the patient looks on the day of making of the provisionals. At this point, you take your 8 micron papers and see that from canine backwards on each tooth, you have one good contact and you hold a shim stock. So that's required to be done, and the shim stock should pass through the incisors. So from canine backward, each and every tooth should have a one solid contact to hold a 8 micron paper or a shim stock. In this particular case, the lower 7 I've still not treated, but at this point I've decided I'm going to save that tooth. I'm not going to extract it because I can always extract it later if it doesn't work and put an implant. The patient is willing to take that risk, although it's at a high biomechanical risk. If it fails later, I can always do an implant there and not have to change anything else in the dentition. So my MIB contacts in provisionals are done, and at this point I will ask the patient to be upright on my chair and use a 200 micron paper to do the chewing pathway adjustments. And this pathway adjustments are what will allow me to get the final contacts without any interferences, so that when the patient's brain wants to find the MIP, whatever interference is coming in that chewing pathway, with this adjustment I'm going to remove that. I'm not posturing the patient's mandible in protrusive and right and left lateral excursion to see if I've achieved canine guidance. I will have achieved it because the canines have now become longer than and sharper than they were. So when they go in right and left lateral excursions, they will hit in the right places, and I will have a false sense of security that I am good with my occlusion. But this is not what we need to do in our patients. We need to make them chew the papers so that we get the correctly. And that's the chewing pathway interferences. And the article listed over here below by Beekman and Cois is a landmark article on this particular subject of the myth of anterior guidance and how these pathway adjustments have to be done. So when I get these contacts here, and these are the chewing pattern interferences, these marks that you see on the paddle of these teeth are the ones that are going to be the centric contacts, but whatever you see on the parallel slopes of the buccal cusp of these teeth, those are the ones that are going to be a problem, and we are going to adjust them. So if I'm going to draw arrows here to show which are my chewing pathway interferences, it's these lines. Wherever the arrow ends, somewhere there is your chewing pathway interference. So we'll take a burr and then take these points off, and this is a almost like a friction-free occlusion now, where there is no pathway interference to the chewing pattern of the patient, and the patient can find patient's brain can find MIP without anything hitting before. That's the patient's lower jaw, and these are the marks. So the buccal slopes of the lingual cusp of the lower teeth are the ones with the chewing interferences, and I'm going to fine tune these marks and take the marks away. And these are the marks that are left behind, and those are the chewing pathway marks that will be left and not removed, because these are the centric contacts on the buccal cusp of the lower teeth. If you go on taking these points away, you will go on reducing the vertical dimension of occlusion. At 3 weeks, I see the patient and he looks like this. The positive findings are that he has not broken any tooth. He is very happy with what he is eating. He has no pain in the muscles. The immobilization test as well as the load test is negative, and he is reporting good feedback with aesthetics. So now I'm good to start with my final. So here I'm going to first scan the approved provisionals so that I have the data with me in the end to make the teeth as long as the patient is approved, or I can take an Algin depression of these upper and lower casts and give it as a guideline to the lab to follow it up. The next few steps are going to be discussed together. So the next step here from here onwards, after the provision is approved, is to do the preparations of the teeth and trying to be in enamel, not clean at all. Then do the tissue management. Go ahead and take impressions, which could be digital impressions or analog impressions. So I'm handle these and then send this work to the lab, and he'll make my final restorations for me. Final restorations could be either lithium disilicate if you have ability to bond the substance to the underlying enamel, which I have, so that's my choice here, or it could be zirconia, which could be a translucent zirconia which we have available these days, and that could allow me to lute the zirconia crowns to the posterior teeth. In this particular case, because I had to make a bridge, I chose zirconia for that bridge, and I chose zirconia as my choice of material for all molars, but everything from premolar to premolar except the upper right premolar will be monolithic lithium disilicate. These are not going to be layered. So my first step here for this patient is, after he has approved the provision, take burrs of known diameters, and Galeb Gurul and Pascal Manier have made these techniques so predictable for us for tooth preps, and we follow that in procedures. So we do these volume-based tooth preparations to be within enamel. Here I have achieved the depth that I wanted, and I realized that I've hardly cut the label. And these are my anterior 6 preps, which I'm going to do first, restorations for first. And when I finish my preps, I am going to leave a knife edge margin, sort of a vertical prep. That's the term which has become famous nowadays, but we've been doing this for decades, and these are knife edge margins on lithium disilicate crowns. So they work very well and allow us to get a good biologic integration of the restoration with the periodontia. Then we go ahead with tissue management, and we prefer to use cords with impregnated with buffered aluminum chloride, and then go ahead and take a digital impression for all these restorations. You could also take an analog impression. The end result would be the same. It's just that the process would be a little more cumbersome. This is a more neater way of doing things, and as time goes by, I'm sure this will also be more accurate, because the shrinkage of the impression material, the expansion of the stone cast, all those things get eliminated here. That's my clearance for the upper arch, upper anterior teeth. The lab then puts this entire material that I've sent him on his exocad. He superimposes the provisionals on the tooth preps to see whether I've got everywhere. Then he does his margin identification, applies a spacer, and goes ahead with the design of the final crowns for the upper 6 teeth. Once I approve these images, he has also given me this data where he has merged the provisionals and the final wax ups that he has done, and they are almost the same. So I don't want any length changes, because if I change the length, that can change aesthetics as well as speech, and I don't want to have that discussion with the patient from this point onwards that something has changed. So we follow what we have approved in this way. The lab then beautifully crafts these restorations and gives us the final product glazed, and this is done by Danish, a very good friend of mine who runs this lab, which is listed below on the slide. And we work hard on getting all these small nuances of the three lobes of the central incisor, the texture, the coloring, and the polychromy that we require, along with all the protocols discussed here. When I call the patient back after around 15 days after taking the measurements, I am now good to remove these crowns, provisionals, and look at the teeth underlying it. And I realize that there's some remnant of resin which can be removed with a 12 number blade. And I have got beautiful tissues here to bond to, and I've got almost 100% enamel on all the teeth. So I started with the treatment plan, and at the end of my treatment, at the delivery appointment, I'm in 100% enamel. And that's the great thing about this protocol. It's systematic, it allows you to be conservative, and does not allow teeth to be damaged in any way. Once I bond this, on the same day I go ahead with the measurement of the lobe and then make a Lucia jig to hold the vertical dimension while I remove the posterior provisions and prepare those two. So now I'm going to do lower anteriors and all posteriors in the next phase of the treatment. That's the bite, the space that I have for all the restorations after the tentative preps are done. The Lucia jig in place, the scan of the upper and the lower cast is done, and then the bite is done in this manner. The space that is there in between. You could also use some aloe wax on one side to stabilize the bite if you feel your bite is unstable, but in this case that was not the scenario. The lab then designs the final restorations for all the lower anterior and posterior teeth and all the upper posterior. And because I'm in a bridge situation here in the upper right quadrant, I'm going to have a layering on zirconia done there to match with aesthetics. I'm not going to do a monolithic Emax bridge, which is by the way contraindicated in this scenario. So that's how I started, and then I bonded all the posterior teeth in place. That's how his final picture is. When he was talking, this was shot to show how active the lower mentalis muscle is rather, and how much tooth structure he shows of the lower jaw. And that's his maximum smile now, and there is a good integration of the lip and the teeth together. So dentofacially he looks nice. That's the retracted view, and that's the view after the completion of the treatment of all the teeth being bonded in place permanently. And he has used these for around 3 weeks, after which these pictures have been taken to show very good perio and restorative harmony, with your teeth being in teeth preps being in enamel almost 100% on all teeth wherever enamel was present before I started, and the margins are all knife edged, with Emax here being the restoration of choice to bring out a very good integration between the perio and restorative aspect. That's the right lateral occlusion in MIP and the left lateral occlusion in MIP, showing very good integration again of the occlusal surfaces with the perio aspect of the case, as well as the overall aesthetic. When you look at these teeth from a very close-up point of view, there is a lot to celebrate here, because we started with the dentition which was breaking down, and we have resurrected it with good conservative techniques. But when you want to really appreciate, and I look at the teeth in this manner at 12 o'clock position, when you are at the back of the patient, that's the point at which you will be able to appreciate the morphology and the lovely lab work that has been done to integrate well with the aesthetic perio and as well as the restorative aspect of this case. Of course, the last step in your full mouth rehab is a good occlusal management, static as well as dynamic. So you have to take a shim stock and see that each tooth from canine backwards will hold the shim stock, and the shim stock will pass the anterior teeth, the incisors. So that's how we started, and that's how we finished up with the occlusal aspect of this patient. That's the lower jaw, and we saved that lower left 7, which was a questionable abutment for us for the time being with a crown, and we hope that it will survive for 4 or 5 years. If not, we are all set to get that out and do an implant later. The patient is ready with that. That's the 8 micron contacts being established on the upper teeth, canine backwards. Each tooth should have a 1 good at least, and that's what we are trying to achieve. If not, we take burrs and we adjust the occlusion here, and at that point then you follow a ceramic polishing protocol, and using your ceramic polishing paste, polish the ceramic intraorally so that you don't end up having crack propagation on rough ceramics. So that's your goal. Shim stock held by each posterior tooth in a well finished occlusion. The shim stock passing through all anterior teeth in a well finished occlusion in MIP. Then you do your pathway adjustments based on the Beckman-Coyce article and do the dynamic occlusion adjustment with a 2 on paper, and these are our pathway contacts for the upper arch, and any contact that you get on the parietal slope of the buccal cusp of the upper teeth, all these areas where the arrow is here has to be taken off. Any contact on the incisors like here has to be taken off. So this in effect is also a canine protected occlusion, but here instead of starting from MIP and looking at the canine at the end of the cycle, I am asking the patient to chew and letting the contacts be there on the canine and maybe the premolar, but not on the other teeth, especially not on the palatal surface of the buccal cusp of the upper teeth. And same in the lower jaw, whatever contacts you see here on the buccal slope of the lingual cusp of the lower teeth, this arrow and this one over here, that needs to be taken off, and all the aspects of your case. Immediate post-operative panoramic X-ray to see any excess resin cement that may be left behind, and if you see any such, this you saw, pass the interproximal saw there, pass the floss, and then clean it up. And then at 3 weeks you saw how nice it when there is nothing left behind. So we saw this case over the last 45 minutes. I'm going to take another 10 minutes here to show you another case quickly and show you a patient with a gummy smile and revise all the steps that we have discussed. Starting point, male patient, 55 years old. He has a full mouth rehab already done before, but that's not working out. Things are breaking. He is breaking down. The vertical dimension is not enough. So I'm going to do the full mouth rehab again for him. That's the MIP on the left and right hand side. He has a lot of erosion on the upper anteriors on the lingual side where the previous dentist has already done composite veneers for him. So I'm remove those and do some treatment for him. That's your postured position, the way a patient never would eat, but we have still taken that picture just for the sake of documentation. But we know that this is not as important as the chewing. The looks can be deceptive as the labial surfaces are nice here, but the lingually entire tooth structure has been eaten up by acid erosion, and the patient did have an history of previous gastric reflux, but now he's treated for that, and the previous dentist has done some form of composite veneers, very nicely saved that tooth, but now he wants to reset further. That's the upper and lower views with filling, dentition and ceramic work. Moderate to high risk because of the gummy smile. Biomechanically, some teeth are at a high risk, especially the upper right molar and the upper left premolar. And perio-wise, he's low risk, as I said. Functionally, he is at a moderate risk. We classified his disorder as occlusal dysfunction. That's his cephalometric findings, and the SNMP again has reduced. It's within normal limits, but it's on the lower side. So we could always increase the vertical dimension, in this case by around 2 to 3 millimeters, so that we can get the restorative space needed to get the ceramic work. So we started with the data and the diagnosis with the Coyce forms, allowing us to have a systematic approach towards these. And those forms are available at coycecenter.com, and these are the first steps. So diagnosis, phase 4 with the dentofacial analyzer, mount the upper cast using the dentofacial analyzer, then deprogram the patient. In this case we did a chair side deprogram, and I'll tell you why later, and did wax record because I wanted to remove all the faulty restorations first, and with faulty restorations I didn't want to deprogram him at this point. So I am basically doing a chair side deprogram and mounting him almost in MIP right now, and then I'll deprogram him and equilibrate his occlusion after the provisions are made, and that's fine too. So that's his MIP mounting in the articulator, and we are using the articulator with a fixed condylar guidance. We don't take protrusive records anymore to program the condylar guidance for our patients, and it has been shown that a fixed condyle guidance is good enough for most of humanity, so it works for majority of the population. We then did a wax up and did that wax up into a nice provisional. But before that, we removed the faulty and looked at the teeth, and we realized some teeth, as you can see here, are biomechanically at a very high risk. My option here is to extract the tooth and do an implant, but again, I will give nature a chance, and the patients psychologically feel better if their teeth are saved, as long as they are willing to get that risk assessment understood and they don't blame me for the failure of these teeth later on. I will save these teeth for the time being. So we make bonded provisionals on all the teeth after etching and bonding as we did earlier, and then we go ahead and the occlusion in MIP. After I gave him the occlusion in MIP, after a week, I gave him the Cois deprogrammer to deprogram his now, and then with an 8 micron paper, along with the series of the events that we follow in occlusal adjustment, we got good contacts from canine backwards on all teeth with an 8 micron. So they hold the shim stock and anteriors will pass the shim stock. So deprogramming and equilibration can be done even after the provisionals have been done. As long as you achieve that before your final restorations, you are fine. You don't have to make provisionals in CR. You have to finish your final restorations in CR. CR is a treatment position. It's not required during diagnostic phase when faulty restorations are present. That's at 4 weeks. No breakage, no staining, no TMJ issue, load test negative. I can go ahead with my final restorations. So again, volume-based anterior preps, upper and lower anterior teeth. But at this point, I'm going to decide whether I should do a full crown or a veneer, because I am going to have composite inside on the palatal surface that will cause too much of difference in the coefficient of thermal expansion. So I decided to remove that composite and do a full crown and get occlusal surface at the back of these teeth. So these are my conservative preps with vertical prep margins, or rather I would prefer to call them almost like a knife edge. And then I do my tissue, drop the margin to where I need to, them, and then take, in this particular case, analog, and then take your centric record and mount the upper cast and the lower cast. So with the upper cast, works on the morphology on all these teeth as per work authorization. And after I etch the anterior teeth, I've realized that I'm again in almost 100% enamel, so I've not cut down more than the damage that was already done, except breaking the contacts. But the contacts are around 0.8 millimeters thick, so if I take away 0.5 from there, I'm still in enamel in the contact areas. The enamel on the contact is 0.8 mm thick. That's my upper and lower anteriors, and then I'll go ahead with posterior preps as we discussed before. The anteriors in this case vertical dimension, and then posterior monolithic. In this case, they are all Emax restorations. That's how I started, and that's how I finished up with a gummy smile. Same systematic approach that we saw in the previous, leading to the same level of predictability in our conservative approach to treating these dentitions. So this is post-operative in the right and left laterals. We will see that all the aspects of we discussed earlier are maintained. And when we look at the patient's dentition from this side, we realize how nice the morphology is. And this is a picture taken at a 6-month recall of the patient. That's the final occlusion. Then shim stock should pass through incisors. So we saw cases and we learned that human beings don't chew inside out. So you don't start in MIP and end in lateral excursion. That's not how human beings chew, and that's why the occlusion should be adjusted with the chewing pathway based on the Beekman-Cois article that I mentioned, and that's how we will adjust the chewing pathway for all our occlusion patients. In fact, that's what we do for all our aesthetic and smile design cases. That's what we do for all our full mouth rehab implant cases. Chewing pathway is something in which you need to be very pay due diligence so that nothing comes in the way of the brain finding MIP. That's the bottom line here. So to summarize, an organized approach is absolutely mandatory. Spend time to evaluate the cause of tooth surface loss. Diagnosis is the key. See whether the patient has acceptable function or a dysfunction, or whether there is a constriction in the chewing envelope, or whether the patient has parafunction. Based on that, draw out your risk assessment and then make your treatment strategies to follow a very conservative adhesive approach wherever possible to be within enamel at the end of tooth preps. That's the goal. I thank you all for this wonderful patient hearing, and I invite you all to visit India someday and take the colors and the festivals and the culture that we soak in and experience a life which is completely different from many other parts of the world. Thank you to Dental XP for giving me this opportunity, and thank you all of you, you really patient listeners. If you have any feedback, any questions, any comments on this, I would really like to listen to you on and receive those on my email. And it's been a privilege, and I wish you all the best in your life. Keep shining. Thank you.